In a remote corner of Nova Scotia, tucked away in the dense woods of the Yarmouth region, lies a massive granite boulder that shouldn't exist. At first glance, it looks like any other glacial erratic left behind by the last ice age, but as the sunlight hits the stone at just the right angle, a series of mysterious carvings begin to emerge. This isn't just graffiti from a bored explorer. These are deeply etched runes, forming a prayer in a language that officially ceased to be spoken in Europe long before Christopher Columbus ever set foot on a ship. This is the Fletcher Stone, better known as the Lord's Prayer Rock, and it is at the center of a historical storm that threatens to rewrite everything we were taught in school about the discovery of the Americas. How did a medieval European dialect, one that was supposedly extinct in the Old World by the 14th century, end up carved into a rock in Canada? If Columbus wasn't the first, and if even the Vikings weren't the only ones here, then who was navigating the treacherous North Atlantic and leaving behind messages of faith in the Canadian wilderness? We are diving deep into a linguistic mystery that defies logic and challenges the very foundations of modern archaeology. To understand the weight of this mystery, we have to talk about the language itself. The carvings on the Yarmouth stone aren't in Latin, nor are they in modern English or French. Scholars who have analyzed the script believe it to be a form of Old Norse or, more specifically, an archaic dialect known as Old Hungarian, or even a rare form of Gothonic runic script. But the most shocking theory points toward a specific archaic European tongue that vanished from the records during the early medieval period. We are looking at a script that shares bizarre similarities with the Vinca symbols or ancient Raetic, languages that were pushed to the brink of extinction as the Roman Empire expanded and the Church standardized European culture. The fact that this language appears on a rock in North America is like finding a smartphone in an Egyptian tomb. It simply doesn't fit the timeline. The story of the stone begins in 1812, when a man named Dr. Richard Fletcher discovered it near the Yarmouth harbor. It lay there weathered by the salt air for decades before anyone realized that the marks weren't just random scratches from natural erosion. When linguists finally got a look at it, they realized the carvings weren't just letters. They were a phonetic representation of a prayer. Specifically, it appeared to be the opening lines of the Pater Noster, or the Lord's Prayer. But why would someone sail across the Atlantic, survive the brutal crossing, and decide that their primary legacy should be a theological inscription in a dead language? The effort required to carve into solid granite is immense. This wasn't a quick note. This was a monumental statement, a mark of occupation, or perhaps a desperate plea for protection in a strange, new land. The standard historical narrative tells us that the Vikings reached Newfoundland around the year 1000 and stayed for a few years before being driven out. But the Lord's Prayer Rock suggests a much more complex and long-term European presence. If the language on the stone vanished in Europe before the 1500s, it implies that people were living, praying, and carving in Canada in the centuries between the Viking collapse and the arrival of the Spanish. This challenges the idea of the Americas as an isolated new world waiting to be discovered. Instead, it paints a picture of a North Atlantic that was far more active than we ever imagined. Small groups of outcasts, religious refugees, or lost mariners might have been making the journey for centuries, leaving behind only these silent stone witnesses. What makes the Yarmouth stone even more compelling is the geological analysis. Skeptics often claim these stones are hoaxes created by 19th-century settlers looking for fame. However, high-resolution scans and weathering studies of the grooves suggest that the carvings are hundreds of years old. The patina inside the letters matches the surrounding rock surface, something that is nearly impossible to fake without modern chemical weathering techniques. Furthermore, the specific style of the runes doesn't match the popular Viking tropes that were common in the 1800s. Whoever carved this knew a specific obscure script that wasn't widely published in academic circles at the time of its discovery. They were writing in their native tongue, a tongue that history books claim was already gone. Linguists have spent years arguing over the vanished nature of this language. Some believe it represents a transitional dialect between the ancient Germanic tribes and the early medieval Scandinavians. Others point to the possibility of a pre-Columbian mission by a group known as the Order of Christ or the Knights Templar, who were known to use secret ciphers and archaic languages to protect their communications. If a group of European nonconformists fled to the Americas to escape persecution, they would have carried their language and their faith with them. In the isolation of the Canadian wilderness, that language might have survived for generations after it was suppressed in Europe, eventually being etched into the granite, when they realized they might never return home. But the Yarmouth stone isn't alone. It is part of a growing map of anomalous finds across North America. From the Kensington runestone in Minnesota to the Spirit Pond stones in Maine, there is a trail of breadcrumbs leading inland from the coast. What makes the Nova Scotia find unique is its overtly religious nature. This wasn't a boundary marker or a record of a hunt. It was an act of worship. In the medieval mind, carving a prayer into stone was a way to sanctify the land. It was a claim of spiritual ownership. If we accept the stone is authentic, we are forced to admit that the Christianization of the Americas didn't start with the Jesuits or the Puritans, but with a nameless group of travelers who spoke a ghost language. Let's talk about the navigation aspect for a moment. Crossing the North Atlantic in a wooden vessel without modern GPS or even reliable compasses is an act of extreme bravery or total madness. But recent scientific discoveries regarding sunstones and ancient maritime currents show that it was entirely possible for small ships to hop from Norway to Iceland, then to Greenland, and finally down the coast of Labrador to Nova Scotia. These travelers wouldn't have need of a massive fleet. They were likely small, self-sufficient communities. The Yarmouth stone sits at a natural harbor, a perfect landing spot for someone traveling south along the coastline. It serves as a gateway to the interior, making it a logical place to leave a message. One of the most mind-bending theories involves the Micmac people, the indigenous inhabitants of the region. Interestingly, early European missionaries were shocked to find that some Mi'kmaq groups already used symbols that looked remarkably like European hieroglyphics and had legends of pale men who arrived in floating islands long ago. Is it possible that the people who carved the Lord's Prayer rock didn't just disappear, but integrated into the local populations? If a small group of Europeans arrived and stayed, their language would eventually fade away, but their stories and perhaps their writing style might influence the local culture. This could explain why the language vanished in both Europe and Canada, leaving only the stone as a final lonely record of its existence. The recent scans mentioned in the title of our discussion have utilized a technology called reflectance transformation imaging, or RTI. This allows researchers to manipulate the light source on a digital model of the stone to see microscopic details that the human eye misses. These scans have revealed ghost characters that were previously thought to be natural wear. These new characters provide the grammatical context that was missing, confirming that the syntax of the inscription follows the rules of a very specific, high medieval European dialect. It removes the possibility of it being a random set of symbols. It is a coherent, structured sentence. The precision of the grammar suggests the carver was not just literate, but likely classically educated, perhaps a monk or a scholar explorer. Why has this been ignored for so long? The answer lies in the Columbian paradigm. For over a century, the academic world held a firm line that no Europeans reached America before 1492. With the exception of the very brief Viking stint, any evidence to the contrary was dismissed as a hoax or a mystery. But as more of these stones are found and as our scanning technology improves, the evidence is becoming too massive to ignore. We are seeing a pattern of pre-colonial contact that spanned hundreds of years. The vanished language of the Yarmouth stone is a puzzle piece in a much larger picture of human migration and global connection that predates the modern era. If you are listening to this and feeling a sense of wonder, it's because this changes the identity of a continent. If North America was being visited by speakers of an extinct European language 500 years before the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria arrived, then the story of discovery is actually a story of rediscovery. The Americas were never truly isolated. They were a destination for those who had the skill to navigate the Great Green Sea. The Lord's Prayer rock is a testament to the endurance of faith and the human drive to explore, even when it means leaving everything behind, including your language. The mystery of the vanished language is also a tragedy. It represents a lost branch of the human family tree. Languages die when the people who speak them are absorbed or overwhelmed. If this stone was carved in a language that was disappearing in Europe, it was a desperate attempt to keep that flicker of culture alive. Every time a researcher deciphers another rune on that granite block, we are hearing a voice from a forgotten world. This isn't just about rocks and dates. It's about the people who stood in that Nova Scotia harbor, watched the sunset over a strange ocean, and hoped that their prayer would be remembered. Scientifically, we are at a turning point. DNA analysis of ancient remains in the region is the next step. If we find European genetic markers in pre-contact skeletons, the case of the Yarmouth stone will be closed forever. But until then, the stone remains a silent sentinel. It challenges us to keep an open mind, and to realize that history is not a static list of facts, but a living, breathing mystery that is constantly being updated by new discoveries. The Lord's Prayer Rock didn't vanish. It waited. It waited for us to develop the technology to read it properly and the courage to accept what it has to tell us. Think about the sheer willpower required to leave such a mark. You are thousands of miles from the world you know. You are surrounded by a wilderness that is beautiful but deadly. You don't have a map. You don't know if you will survive the next winter. In that moment of profound vulnerability, you turn to your faith and your heritage. You take a chisel and you labor over a granite face, etching words that connect you back to your ancestors. That is what we are looking at in Nova Scotia. It is an artifact of the human spirit. As we continue to analyze the Yarmouth stone with even more advanced tools, like laser ablation and isotopic dating of the mineral crusts, we are peeling back the layers of time. Every year, the Columbus first narrative looks more like a simplified fairy tale, and the medieval America theory looks more like a scientific reality. The vanished language on the rock is a bridge between two worlds, a bridge that was crossed long before we thought it was possible. It serves as a reminder that the world has always been smaller than we imagined, and that the oceans were never barriers, they were highways for the brave. The preservation of the stone is now a major priority for local historians. After being moved several times and even being used as a doorstep at one point in its history, it is finally being treated with the respect it deserves. It is a national treasure that belongs not just to Canada, but to the world. It is one of the few tangible links we have to the shadow history of the North Atlantic. If you ever find yourself in Nova Scotia, standing before this ancient granite block, remember that you are looking at the handwriting of a phantom, a person who spoke a language that no longer exists on this earth, but whose words still echo in the silence of the Canadian woods. The linguistic connection to European ghost languages is perhaps the most tantalizing part. Some researchers have compared the Yarmouth script to the Magyar runes or the Old Hungarian script, which was used by European tribes before being replaced by the Latin alphabet under the pressure of the Holy Roman Empire. If these are indeed Magyar runes, it suggests an even more incredible journey. It would mean that people from Central Europe found their way to the Atlantic coast and then across the ocean. This would imply a level of mobility in the Middle Ages that is currently absent from our history books. It suggests that the medieval world was a place of constant movement, where a person from the Carpathian Mountains could end up on the shores of the Atlantic. The Lord's Prayer aspect is also vital. The specific version of the prayer used can often be used to date a text within a 50-year window. By looking at the specific phrasing and the choice of words in this archaic dialect, scholars are narrowing down the date of the inscription to the late 13th or early 14th century. This is a critical period in history. It is the time of the great climate shift known as the Little Ice Age, which made the North Atlantic significantly more dangerous. It is also the time when the Norse colonies in Greenland began to fail. Was this stone carved by a group of Greenlanders looking for a more hospitable climate further south, or were they travelers from even further afield, pushed west by the changing world? The geology of Nova Scotia itself provides some clues. The region is rich in minerals and timber, resources that would have been incredibly valuable to medieval Europeans. If they were looking for more than just a place to pray, if they were looking for a place to build and survive, Yarmouth would have been an ideal location. The Lord's Prayer Rock might have been the cornerstone of a settlement that is yet to be fully discovered. We often look for ruins of stone cities, but a medieval European settlement in Canada would have been made of wood and earth, materials that would leave very little trace after 700 years in a damp forest. The rock is the only thing that survived, because it was the only thing that couldn't rot. We are also seeing a shift in how Indigenous oral histories are being treated by scientists. For a long time, Mi'kmaq stories were dismissed as myths, but when these stories are overlaid with the locations of runestones and anomalous archaeological sites, the patterns are undeniable. The Glooscap legends of the Mi'kmaq speak of a great teacher who came from the east in a stone canoe. While stone canoe is likely a metaphor for a sturdy, unknown vessel, the direction and the arrival of a foreign figure align perfectly with the idea of pre-contact visitors. The Yarmouth stone is the physical evidence that gives these oral traditions a solid foundation in reality. The language that vanished before Columbus wasn't just a way of speaking. It was a way of seeing the world. Every language carries with it a unique perspective on life, nature, and the divine. By losing that language, we lost a piece of the human story. But through the Lord's Prayer Rock, we are getting a small piece of it back. It is like a message in a bottle that took half a millennium to reach the shore. Now that it's here, it is our responsibility to listen to what it has to say. It tells of a journey that was difficult, a faith that was deep, and a presence that was real. As you consider the mystery of this rock, think about the map of the world. Think about how many other stones might be out there, buried under moss or hidden in remote canyons waiting for someone to walk by at the right time. The Yarmouth stone was only found because it was in a place where people lived. How much more of our history is still out there, hidden in plain sight? Because we haven't asked the right questions, or because we don't have the right tools yet. The Lord's Prayer Rock is a beacon, showing us that the known world is just a small part of the real story. In the coming years, we can expect more breakthroughs. Artificial intelligence is now being used to analyze ancient scripts, comparing the Yarmouth runes to millions of other inscriptions from across the globe in seconds. This digital linguistic analysis is already finding matches that human scholars missed for decades. We are on the verge of finally reading the full text of the stone, and perhaps even identifying the specific region of Europe the carver came from. When that happens, the vanished language will no longer be a ghost. It will be a documented part of our global heritage. The story of the Lord's Prayer Rock is a reminder that we live in an age of discovery. We aren't just looking at the stars or the deep ocean. We are discovering our own past, right under our feet. Canada, a country often seen as young in the eyes of the world, is proving to have a history that is as ancient and complex as any other. The stones are talking, and they are telling us that the world was connected long before the age of empires. They are telling us that people have always been explorers, dancers with danger, and seekers of the horizon. So the next time you hear that Columbus was the first to discover America, think of the Fletcher stone. Think of the archaic runes and the vanished language. Think of the nameless carver who stood in Nova Scotia hundreds of years before the Italian explorer was even born, and who left behind a prayer to a God they trusted in a land they were just beginning to know. Their language may be gone from the streets of Europe, but it is forever etched into the heart of Canada. It is a mystery that has survived 500 years, and it is a discovery that is only just beginning. This discovery also changes the way we think about the concept of vanished. Just because a language isn't spoken in the halls of power or written in modern books doesn't mean it's gone. It lives on in the place names, the oral traditions, and the silent stones of the world. The Yarmouth stone proves that the past is never truly dead. It's just waiting for the light to hit it at the right angle. It encourages us to look closer at our own surroundings, to question the official version of things, and to realize that there is always more to the story. The Lord's Prayer Rock is more than just a piece of granite. It is a symbol of our shared human journey. It is a bridge across time, connecting us to a forgotten era of exploration and faith. As we move forward into a future of even greater scientific discovery, let us remember the lessons of the Iceman and the runestone. Let us remember that the truth is often stranger than fiction, and that the most incredible stories are the ones that are written in stone, waiting for us to find them. The vanished language of Nova Scotia is calling out to us. And finally, we are starting to understand what it's saying. The linguistic diversity of medieval Europe was far greater than most people realize. Before the standardization of languages like English, German, and French, the continent was a tapestry of local dialects and ancient tribal tongues. These languages weren't just primitive versions of what we speak today. They were sophisticated systems with their own unique poetry and logic. When a language like the one on the Fletcher stone vanishes, we lose an entire way of understanding the world. This stone is a rare linguistic fossil, a survivor from a destroyed forest of words. We are performing a kind of linguistic archaeology, rebuilding a lost world one character at a time. The religious context of the prayer is also a fascinating area of study. In the 13th century, the way people prayed was heavily influenced by their local culture and the specific branch of Christianity they followed. The Yarmouth inscription uses a particular word for daily bread that is only found in a few specific medieval European regions. This kind of theological fingerprinting is allowing researchers to trace the carver back to specific monastic traditions or cultural enclaves. It's like finding a person's DNA through their choice of words. It proves that the carver wasn't just a casual traveler, but someone who carried a very specific cultural and religious identity across the sea. Furthermore, the physical labor involved in the carving tells us something about the carver's state of mind. Granite is one of the hardest stones to work with. To etch a long inscription into its surface would take days, if not weeks, of consistent effort. This implies that the group was stationary for at least some time. They weren't just passing through in a hurry. They were established enough to spend time on monumental art. This supports the idea of a temporary or even semi-permanent settlement in the Yarmouth area, a place where people had time to think, to pray, and to leave a lasting mark for those who would follow. Ultimately, the mystery of the Lord's Prayer Rock reminds us that history is a series of overlapping stories. There is the story of the indigenous peoples who have called this land home for thousands of years. There is the story of the Norse explorers, the Basque fishermen, and the secret travelers who may have left this stone. And there is the story of the modern scientists who are using every tool at their disposal to solve these ancient riddles. All of these stories together make up the rich, complex history of North America. The stone is a focal point where all these narratives meet, a piece of granite that holds the secrets of a vanished world and the promise of a more enlightened future. As the sun sets over the harbor in Nova Scotia and the shadows lengthen across the granite, the ruins of the Fletcher stone seem to glow with a quiet energy. They have survived the rise and fall of empires, the birth of nations, and the total transformation of the world around them. They remain as they were when they were first carved, a message of faith in a vast, unknown wilderness. We may never know the name of the person who held the chisel, but thanks to modern science and a relentless desire for the truth, we are finally hearing their voice. And it is a voice that tells us we are never truly alone in our exploration of this incredible planet. History is always waiting to be discovered, one rock at a time.